Well, no, my hearty my, sorry about that little technical glitch, but glad that you're with us. I'm Monique Bradley. Welcome to this live stream. It's great to have you here on whatever channel you're watching on tonight. It's Diabetes Action Month here in New Zealand for the whole of the month, and this is where we're going to talk about the big topics, the real topics, talking about something that's dear to many of our hearts, diabetes distress. And to help me with that conversation tonight, here in the studio in Auckland, Dr. Anna Friis. Great to have you here on the couch.
Thank you.
A big topic to talk about tonight.
Absolutely.
And they're beaming in also from Wellington. We have live, I can hear her in my ear, the very lovely Ruby McGill, beaming in from Wellington. Kia ora to you, Ruby. How are you doing?
Kia ora koutou. Good. Pleased to be here.
It's great to have you with us on this very important chat. Thank you for joining us tonight. All right, well, the reason for this is we are talking about the concept of love, don't judge. That's the theme for Diabetes Awareness Month this month. And we're talking about information that's just currently come to hand from a recent study, or a survey in fact, delivered by the team at Diabetes New Zealand on emotional wellbeing, a survey all around that. 81% of people that were surveyed have experienced diabetes distress, and that's affecting people with type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes and gestational diabetes. It's a big topic, but what actually is diabetes distress? How is it different from depression? That's a topic we're going to cover tonight. What is it? How do we deal with it? What can we do to help friends or whānau who may be experiencing symptoms of distress? What do we need to look out for? That's what tonight's conversation is about. And you guys are also part of the conversation as well. So I have a computer here. If you've got any questions at all, please feel free to message and ask questions. We have two guests who will be I'll be sharing those questions with you guys. And you there, Ruby, that I can hear in the background, will be asking those big questions to both of you tonight and sharing your own lived experiences as well as Anna's clinical experience in dealing with diabetes distress. So first of all, Anna, for people who don't know you, what a background. You started out working in PR and in the corporate world, and then my understanding is you've done your PhD in mindful self-compassion, something we're going to look at tonight as well. And I'm really interested to hear that you did specifically your doctorate in psychological and the physiological effects of self-compassion training, particularly on the biological markers of stress among people living with diabetes. That's a very niche topic. What triggered you to move into working with people with diabetes?
Yeah. Oh, well, it was, I've long been, I suppose, interested in the mind-body connection. I've always practiced yoga. And so how our psychology affects our physiology has always been an interest, which I guess prompted my transition from journalism, PR, into actually wanting to be a psychologist.
Wow.
And because I was deeply interested in what it means to be human and how the way we treat ourselves actually impacts our physical and mental health. And so I went back to university for quite a long time and retrained as a psychologist, got to the end of that, thought, phew, that's over, and found myself on a placement working with people with diabetes at North Shore Hospital. And it was really from there that I became so aware of the additional burden of depression for people living with diabetes. So what we know is that people with diabetes have, up to 3 times the rate of depression than the general population. So that's what I was basically there to attend to. But what I really became curious about was distress or psychological suffering that's not directly depression, but actually still is really, really difficult for people. And so I really could see that people judging themselves and beating themselves up was actually making things worse, and that I had a kind of an idea that if I could help people to be a little mindful about how they were treating themselves and a bit kinder to themselves, that maybe we could see measurable effects in people's HbA1c. And so I kind of had this, after all those years back at university, I went to bed one night and I woke up in the night and I thought, you know what? Kindness really matters here. And it really matters to me to kind of provide some scientific evidence for that, so that my dream is that, doctors can prescribe kindness and compassion as a thing.
Beautiful.
Because we know that it is, for my 4 years of research and published studies, we know that actually the practice of mindfulness and kindness makes a difference.
Yeah. That's incredible. That resonates with me as well. Love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we're going to be diving a little deeper into your research as this conversation unfolds tonight. Super excited to have you here on the couch. Thank you.
It's really a pleasure to be here. I feel very honoured to have this opportunity to talk about kindness with you all.
I think we all feel that same level of honour about such an important topic, and diabetes distress. And I have a bit of a diabetes history myself, and knowing that this is something people don't normally talk about. I think it's an honour for all of us to be able to create a platform here for, including you people watching tonight as well, to be part of that conversation. And again, if you've got any comments or questions, feel free to share them on the newsfeed that you're watching this live stream on, and we'll address those questions as the live stream progresses. But we're going to pop over now to Ruby. So for those of you who haven't met Ruby McGill before, you may have seen her pop up in some social media, or you may have read her blog. She is in fact a bit of a brand ambassador, I guess you could say, for Diabetes New Zealand. It's so wonderful to have you here, living with type 1 diabetes. You're a blogger as well, and you've also worked, you've been the Director of Youth for Diabetes New Zealand. Wow, what a life journey. Can you take a moment to share a little bit about your diabetes story?
Absolutely. So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 14 years old, so just over 21 years ago. So 21 years living the highs, the lows, the ups and downs, and always determined to never let it slow me down. It can't define me, and all of those beautiful things to keep moving and living past that diagnosis. However, when it comes to diabetes distress, so again, like so many of us here, very close to my heart, in that throughout my own journey, sort of 6 years ago, only learning that this was even a thing. And then from that, going through a period where I was, very burnt out, and having to decide to step on a journey and truly look after myself to master diabetes, and realizing that the mental side of it was just as important as the testing the blood sugars, and haven't looked back.
Wow. And I mean, your website's about mastering diabetes directly, so an amazing story, an amazing journey. And I think one of the things that I resonated with there is that understanding that distress is a thing.
Absolutely.
And even before this live stream, talking with Dr. Anna and learning a bit more about the difference between distress and depression, and to know what to look out for. I think that's a big part of tonight's conversation as well. And through this journey, we'll get you to share a little bit of your experience so that people can really get an understanding of what the difference is between distress and depression, and what to look out for, either for themselves or for their friends and whānau that they want to look after too. So thank you, Ruby. We're going to come back to you in and out through this live stream and ask you some more questions from that lived experience. Thank you so much.
Look forward to it.
Great stuff. So just while we are here on this live stream, it is really important to know that we are here to listen to you guys and to be part of the conversation. But at the same time, if anything does resonate with you, if you're feeling a little bit triggered throughout this conversation, if it's a little bit too close to home, please note that this is a conversation, and we are just here to open up that conversation for you, sharing personal experiences. And if you actually need help and support, there is help and support available. You can free call or text 1737, and you can actually talk to a trained counsellor anytime, day or night. They're there. And as a backup resource, you've also got the diabetes.org.nz website, which you can see at the bottom of the screen there. You are welcome to head to that site to learn more about diabetes. So I guess this is the elephant in the room. What actually is diabetes distress, Dr. Anna?
So diabetes distress is distress specifically about your diabetes. So it might be around access to the right care, it might be access to support, or it might be just feeling overwhelmed by the burden, the psychological burden of living with diabetes. So it's you can, while it also affects mood, it's not the generalized low mood that we see with depression more generally. So, but it's equally as important to understand, because both depression and distress affect behavioural and self-management practices with people living with diabetes. So both kind of a bit paralysing and get in the way of taking care of yourself, adhering to medication or lifestyle regimes. They also both set up a bit of a vicious cycle of self-criticism and self-judgment. So, okay, I'm not testing enough, I'm not doing this enough, I'm not going to my appointments enough, I'm not enough. I love I love the topic, the title for this week, Love, Don't Judge.
Beautiful. Because
so much of what happens with both distress and depression is self-judgment, and that adds to not just the physiological effects of managing glycemic control, but also to the burden. So it's a vicious cycle.
Wow. So if people, how can people look at themselves and look at their own experience, and how can they tell, is it depression? Is it distress? What should people be looking for?
Yeah. So people who, might be kind of functioning quite well in their lives, they are, managing other aspects of their life quite well, but it's their diabetes that causes kind of specific stress and distress. So that is more likely to be diabetes distress. So with depression, it is a kind of, has generalized, affects our life more generally. So,
right.
and both of them are not well picked up. So what we know from studies is that, often only around 50% of people with depression have their depression picked up by their doctor. So, and distress is likely to be a whole lot less obvious as well, because people can do, it looks like they're coping, but actually their distress is quite targeted to how they feel about their diabetes.
Wow, so interesting. So we will pop down now to Ruby, and let's have a chat about that lived experience of dealing with distress. Ruby, tell me, I read on your website, found this really interesting. You said that you opened up the conversation about the fact that one day what was working for you with your diabetes control and management suddenly changed, and you had to deal with the effects of that, not just physically but emotionally. So tell me about that experience for you and the distress you may have experienced.
Yeah. So that particular time you speak of, I'd been having quite a few nighttime hypos that, out of the blue, and it was probably for the first time ever, I think, in my diabetes career. I felt I'd got up and I thought, I just can't function. This is taking over. I can't enjoy my career or my family. And at that peak, the absolute peak, I couldn't see how diabetes was going to get easier. I was just thought, this is how it's always going to be. It's going to be hard work, and and that's tough when you think, this is as good as it gets. And I think I was pretty burnt out at that point, but I'm also very aware that actually with diabetes distress, I sort of dip in and out on a, as things kind of flare up, and when it's not so bad, what it does look like for me is that I'm certainly more critical if my blood sugars are high or low. So rather than going, okay, they're high, what went wrong, or what can this teach me, the self-talk is saying, you messed up again, you're a bad diabetic, think about the long-term complications, and that's hard. And I mentioned it's that vicious cycle. And actually, to put the record straight, there is no such thing as a good or a bad diabetic. We're all simply doing the best that we can with the resources we have and the information we have in front of us at that time.
So true, so true. So, I mean, obviously, you're a parent as well, so dealing with that distress, and you're talking about the changes in your blood sugars and the effect on your mood. So how has that distress affected, if you don't mind me asking, how has it affected your family, and how has it affected your parenting? What's the effect?
It's like, I'd love to say it does. No, we can soldier on, but let's be honest, it does affect all of it. And when I am particularly stressed or worried about my diabetes, I certainly know that I'm snappier. My temper's shorter. I'm tired, and so of course all of those things are going to affect how I interact. With the people I see the most, the people I love. And so, yeah, so again, that's hard, because I'm very aware that it affects my mood, which then affects how I interact.
Yeah, so in a situation like that, what do you do to manage that? Do you give yourself time out? What's your protocol?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate that, as I mentioned earlier, that probably for the last 6 years I've been very aware that diabetes distress is a thing. So when this is happening, it's never failing. It's simply saying, right, things are a bit much right now. So I am very conscious to either create space for myself to kind of check in some time to myself, or I'm very good at sharing that with my family and kind of scooping them up, and we disappear. We head out, into the bush, we head out for a walk, to kind of change the scene and do all of those things that actually, fill my cup or improve my mental fitness, to help us sort of move through that part.
And that's really the heart of, I guess, the conversation tonight, especially with having you here and having Dr. Anna here on the couch with me as well, is really talking about you can't necessarily change that situation, but you can change the way you deal with it. Would that be a fair assumption?
Absolutely, yeah. Looking at, I can't take the type 1 diabetes away, but what can I change? Can I change how I'm going to let this high blood sugar affect me? Yeah, possibly. Also, it might simply be as easy, I'm going to acknowledge that and then move on. But yeah, what can I change? What can I focus on to make this a bit easier?
Really good, solid advice there. Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to jump back to Dr. Anna here, and let's talk from a clinical perspective. Let's talk about the clients that you're dealing with who are experiencing diabetes distress. What are we likely to see?
Well, I really love how Ruby spoke to the fact that it's hard. It's a 24/7 assignment living with diabetes. There's no holidays. Those of us without diabetes are kind of living on automatic. People with diabetes are kind of living on manual. Everything. It's a 24/7, like I say, assignment, as Ruby points out. So, the first thing when people find themselves overwhelmed and burnt out is like, yeah, I get it. It's hard. You're not alone. I don't think anybody would sail through their whole life with diabetes and not have times when it's really hard. Life's hard. Yes. Let's face it. For all of us.
This year's been very hard.
And this year's been very hard. So I think that suffering is part of life, but certainly adding living with diabetes to that, is an additional burden. So. Also, as Ruby said, it's kind of how we can relate to that can have a measurable, palpable effect on, whether we can make that more or less difficult for ourselves.
And in fact, that was going to be my next question: is how, with your professional hat on, how can mindfulness, how can compassion? Ruby's talking about taking some time out. How can that actually affect people in a positive way who are living with diabetes?
Well, I can probably illustrate it with a story, I think, perhaps most effectively, and it really leads me into how kind of I got into this area. And it did happen very early on in my experience of working with people in the diabetes clinic. One day, very early on, I had on my list of people to see a 20-year-old type 1 patient, and we'll call her Mary. And I had been told by my team that Mary had not turned up to multiples of her appointments, and that because our waiting list was very extensive, that if she didn't turn up again, probably I was just going to have to sort of put her to one side and go to the next person on the list. So I really had my fingers crossed that Mary would turn up, and when I went out to the waiting room, she wasn't there, and I thought, oh no, but I couldn't bear to just put her to the side. So I rang her mobile number, and she picked up. Turned out Mary was sitting in the car park, almost immediately outside my room, where she had been for each one of her previous appointments that she didn't show up for. And so I went out and sat in the car with her. And she said, I can't come in. I feel so overwhelmed. I feel so bad about myself. I know I haven't been testing. I know I haven't, provided the results. I know I haven't been administering my insulin enough. I'm bad, and I know it's going to be terrible, and I can't bear to go in. And so I really understood that her self-criticism had just sort of paralyzed her.
Yes.
She just couldn't face any more what she felt might be, additional kind of affirmation that, yes, she was making a bit of a hash of this. So in that moment, I recognized that what she needed most was to, A, be understood, that it was really hard sometimes, and sometimes it was overwhelming, and sometimes it felt too much, to know that she wasn't alone. So kind of validation of the fact that it's hard. So that, I guess, is a mindfulness practice, like just acknowledging that, yeah, this is hard. And then I asked her, what would you say to your best friend who was in your situation? And she said, well, I'd probably say, yep, this sucks. I'm here with you. If you go into the clinic, you'll be able to, get some more advice and get what you need. I'm here with you. You're not alone. I'll come along with you. So, if she recognized that once she was able to be kind and understanding to herself and kind of shift that inner voice from, judgment to understanding and warmth and kindness, when she was able to offer herself the same kind words as she would naturally offer to someone she cared about, actually, you know what? She got out of the car and, we wandered in and we sat down, and she actually met with her clinic nurse, and she actually did have a test, and it wasn't great. But once again, I said to her, what would you say to your friend who just got a result that wasn't so great? She said, that's okay. At least we have a benchmark. What is it that you most need right now in order to take the most care of yourself? So what occurred in that car that day planted the seed for my series of studies through the University of Auckland Medical School that showed that mindfulness and then the practice of compassion changes things for people. Not only are they less distressed, but actually that stress, or that reduction in stress, can be measured physiologically, and could, in fact, and what we showed was that people who had learnt to be kinder to themselves, their HbA1c actually came down.
See, that's the thing. That's the stuff that I'm really wanting to know, is how can that mindfulness, I mean, Ruby, you've been talking about it as well. You scoop your family up, you go out, but how does it actually affect somebody, not just emotionally and mentally? How does that mental state or that change affect you physiologically?
Okay.
It's a big question.
Monique, I'll tell you the easy way.
Good.
So your brain has two jobs. To survive is the first job.
Yes.
To reproduce is the second job. So as part of surviving, you are hypervigilant to physical threats. So if I move to punch you, I'm not going to punch you.
Thank you.
Your eyes would see a threat coming that would send a message to your, the amygdala and the parts of your brain, and you go, and that would set off a cascade of neurophysiological processes linked to fight and flight. So your blood sugar would go up. Yes. Why? You need energy, sugar, to go to the muscles to get out of the way of the stress. So your heart rate is up. You are activated. So turns out that if you are to beat yourself up, not good enough, people are disappointed in you, I'm so disappointed in you, that self-attack precipitates a similar physiological response.
Wow.
So it's kind of, I become the attacker and the attacked. So in the same way that my physiology responds to a physical attack, the same thing happens when I'm launching my own attack. You think about it. If you're beating yourself up, you're like this, right? So here's the thing. I'm not just a reptile, I'm also a have a mammalian kind of caregiving circuitry, so that when I'm kind to myself, in the same way that I'd be kind to a child, I move into a different part of my brain.
Yeah.
And that is linked to oxytocin. So
Yes.
fight and flight is cortisol, which is linked to increased HbA1c. And when I'm kind and loving to myself, I'm in a different part of my brain.
That's
And you can feel it in your body.
incredible.
But you know what that feels like. If you're,
Yeah.
if, you know, Ruby, if one of your children, you picked one of your children up from school and they are really agitated and in fight and flight, what's the first thing you do to that child?
Scoop them up, place
Yeah.
Scoop them up,
And
touch
give
them, go, darling.
give
And
them a hug.
what is your tone of voice?
calm,
Kind,
and soft,
loving.
makes a lot of sense.
And what happens to that child in your arms? They go, ugh. It's the same thing.
It's the same thing. I believe we may have some questions from the news feed. So, wow, there's a lot. Such an incredible story. I'm just going to jump a little bit ahead of schedule and have a look at some of the questions you guys are sharing through. Just incredible stories of people. Thank you all for sharing. This is incredible. Also in the news feed, Nicholas Schuler has shared your website in there as well. So for anybody wanting to learn more about the work that Dr. Anna Friis does, you can have a look on the website. People saying, I've had type 1 diabetes for the past 13 and a half years. All I can say is diabetes is like life. It's a big roller coaster ride. And actually, Ruby, I was going to jump back to you around that, talking about, what is the effect of, that negative self-talk that you go through with distress, which is essentially what you've been highlighting, Anna. What is the effect on your health? Does one perpetuate the other? Is it the chicken, the egg situation? If you consciously move into a good mind space, does that positively affect your physical health? Tell me about that experience as well.
So it's an interesting one, and exactly what Anna was saying, like when my blood sugars are high and I'm feeling stressed, and potentially then that self-talk is coming in unconsciously, and they become stubborn high. So rather than just kind of up and down, right, we're back in range, the self-talk and their sticking around, and I can feel, I'm getting angrier and more frustrated. And then we joke about in the type 1 community, and then we rage bolus because I've got to get them down. And obviously, giving extra insulin, it's not working, right, even more. And then we crash, and obviously all of the side effects and symptoms from that. So it's just, up, down, when potentially, when I'm having that stubborn low, avoiding the rage bowler thing, being a little bit kinder. I've certainly noticed that, right, yes, we're getting back into range, or at the very least, it still may take the same amount of time, but I'm not as worked up about it.
Right. Yeah. So it's about managing your state. It's emotional.
Yeah.
It's state management as much as it is physically and emotionally. Would that be fair, Dr. Anna?
Yep. And that's, as Ruby's describing anecdotally, exactly what my research showed, was that distress is directly linked to HbA1c.
Right.
However, people who learned to be more mindful and to be kinder to themselves, even though they were distressed, because this is the thing, it was normal for people to have times of distress, even though they were distressed, this kind of buffering with self-compassion, like, okay, it's okay to be, this is normal and understandable, what can I do to help? As Ruby says, scooping the kids up, doing stuff that actually is a kindness. Even though they were distressed, people who are higher in self-compassion, their HbA1c was lower.
Yeah,
so it's like self-compassion is like a kind of a buffer, like a I just talked to my kids about this, and self-compassion is like a Harry Potter invisible cloak that you sort of, it goes with you everywhere. Like no matter what happens, it's like, okay, I've kind of got this.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That makes me so happy. So we are just about to jump into some more questions from the feed, because I know you guys have been so active tonight. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to have you as part of the conversation. I just do need to say, however, that if you need help and support, we're going to share a graphic here on the screen, which has the details of who you can connect with. So there is, in fact, a free call or text support network there for you, 1737. You can talk to a trained counsellor anytime, day or night. If any of this conversation is resonating with you, or you've got family or friends who may be experiencing some of the distress symptoms that we've been talking about in tonight's live feed. Now, speaking of the live feed, I am going to hop on the conversation now and have a look. Great to see so many of you on here. Oh, hello from Wellington, kia ora from Hamilton, hello from Upper Hutt. Wonderful to see so many of you. Hi from Dunedin, Rotorua, Gore, shout out to Gore. We love you guys. There's lots of links being shared here, which is wonderful. This is a community after all, and we want you all to be part of the conversation. Hi from Invercargill, great to see you guys. Hubby watching from Dunedin, we like that. Warkworth. So many of you, and lots of resources being shared. Of course, a great resource you need to have a look at is all the information on the Diabetes official New Zealand website, diabetes.org.nz. There's information that's just been released about this study, which had 1,000 participants in it, talking about the conversation to do with diabetes distress, who is experiencing it. 81% of the 250,000 people in New Zealand with diabetes experience diabetes distress at some stage. So that's why we're having these conversations now, to know that you are not alone, as you've talked about. In fact, Ruby's talked about as well. We're all in this together. Everybody's experiencing similar symptoms, so you are not alone, which is why it's important to reach out. You can see that number at the top of the screen cycling through. Karen Reed has just asked, this is a great question, interested to learn more about the distinction between diabetes distress and depression. Now, we were just about to dive into that anyway. Given that how you feel about diabetes, possibly negatively, can potentially lead to thoughts around how you feel about yourself, leading to low esteem and potentially depression. That is a rabbit warren I want to dive into. So Ruby, I'll come to you very shortly, but let's start with you, Dr. Anna, on your thoughts around that.
Well, I think that distress and depression, there's definitely an overlap. So, you know, and I guess the point is that both make the burden of living with diabetes more difficult. I guess the thing about perhaps these subgroups, you know, there is kind of, you know, there is clinical major depressive disorder, there is, you know, subclinical depression, and then there is diabetes distress. The reason why, you know, perhaps is useful to kind of differentiate is because, you know, if you have major depression, there are options for treatment. You know, that may include medication, it may include different types of therapy. Distress, diabetes-specific distress, is perhaps best supported by understanding the focus of that distress, whether it is, I don't feel like my family understand me, I don't feel that I've got support around me, I feel isolated, I feel that I don't feel confident in the care I'm having, I feel overwhelmed by the burden, I'm scared about the needles. You know, these are the reason why it's helpful to sort of unpack what it is that I'm exactly feeling. It's helpful because then that dictates what form of help I might get.
So the best person to speak to is obviously a health professional around that.
Absolutely.
So we don't people.
Don't try and diagnose it yourself.
Dr. Google is not your friend.
Dr. Google is not your friend, yeah.
You're better to do things like go to the diabetes.org.nz website. There is information that you can download on there, even for people who are starting their diabetes journey or are concerned about their health. You can actually take a quiz on the website as well to have a look and see if you are potentially at risk. There's a bunch of resources worth checking. There's the link there on the screen for that risk quiz that you can take. Such an important conversation. Ruby, I want to jump into that as well. In fact, there's been a lot of people saying, yeah, really resonating with what you've experienced as well, Ruby. I was just typing the same thing that you were as you were saying it, which is fantastic. And other people saying, I've just been diagnosed. This live stream couldn't have happened at a better time. Thank you, guys. So, Ruby, in your experience, like you've been a mum, you've gone through giving birth, and obviously for many women, postpartum depression is real and huge. Did you experience that, and how is that different from the distress you've experienced? Just because I'm mindful of the fact that people in the survey also have gestational diabetes, and I just want to really get my head around that real distinction between what people may experience with depression as opposed to distress.
So I suppose certainly I've got two young children, so a 4 and a 9-year-old, and um, I don't believe I suffered or had any postnatal depression. However, I've always been very mindful of my mental health. So when it comes, looking at the whole mental health, kind of like as a continuum, I've heard it called or looked at. So conscious about how I'm continually building my mental health or my mental fitness so I can better deal with whatever diabetes throws at me. And there are absolutely some really flat moments. And that's when I'm really conscious about what am I doing to improve my mental fitness. I'm a massive advocate for the 5 ways of well-being. So which, keep learning, give your time, taking notice, so the mindfulness, being active, connecting with people, to ensure I'm continually kind of filling that cup, so that when I am in those kind of flat or distressed or hard times, that I'm able to kind of work through that.
Such important messages in there, and I think a lot of the people that I'm seeing coming through through the chat, as well as saying, things like, I find it really hard because I live alone. You're saying reach out to people, so that was great timing with that comment. A question here too, do you have any tips or advice on how to comfort and encourage a diabetic preschooler? Wow, what a huge question as well, when they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed or distressed. Ruby, I'll shoot that one to you first.
So my advice or recommendation, based on having lived with type 1, would be obviously, ideally in an ideal world, sort of having those conversations and talking about how it could be tough and what we could do to get through that together, actually when we're in a position where we're feeling very well. So we're creating some plans and ideas, and what can we do to keep ourselves strong for when it does get a little bit crap, because it may do. It's normal. This is hard. I know that if we are only having those conversations when actually we kind of, we are feeling pretty flat, potentially that could be a little bit trickier. Still helpful, of course, but if we're able to normalise it and do it when we are feeling well, let's make some plans. And as I said about those, using the 5 ways to well-being. So for a younger child, are we, play dates with friends? Are we getting out and keeping active? Are we dance parties in the lounge? Are we, having some time to do things we love, colouring in? I know my family, a thing we incorporated a couple of years ago is at the dinner table, around the table, sharing our top 3 things, our 3 good things for the day, as simple as that, to kind of to help build that mental fitness.
Love it. Now, over to you, Dr. Anna, around that, looking more not just at the wee ones as well now, but the big kids as well in our family who, I've got several family members who also struggle with symptoms of distress. What can we do to support all of our family who may be struggling with those symptoms of distress?
Well, I think that the first thing to know is that self-compassion and mindfulness, it's a training. It's exactly as Ruby says, you do it, you lift. It's like going to the gym. You go to the gym and lift weights, and you start with small weights and then you gradually, lift bigger and bigger weights, so that when the going gets tough, you're strong.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, self-compassion and mindfulness. It's a form of brain training. Your brain is a muscle, right? Just like any part of your body. So that's important to know. Second thing, 2 really simple things. The thing that I kind of, for me, is like 101, self-compassion 101, is this thing called the self-compassion break. And it really, it taps into the 3 components that we're talking about. mindfulness, which is like, okay, right, this is a moment of difficulty. I'm suffering right now. I am feeling overwhelmed. I am feeling burnt out. I've had enough. This is acknowledging this is difficult. Mindfulness. Secondly, other people feel like this. I'm not alone. And then thirdly, and I really love this, and there's now so much evidence for the benefit of simply a soothing and supportive touch. When we spoke about how do you scoop up the child, you stroke them. We have nerve endings that project into our heart space, that part of the parasympathetic nervous system. And when we actually give ourselves a supportive touch, around our heart or around our arms or even holding our own hand, what we're doing is we're activating our parasympathetic nervous system so that we actually feel calmer. So the simple practice of this is difficult. Other people feel like this, and then maybe may I be kind to myself in this moment? What is it that I most need right now? Or even with small children, and I don't work with small children, but I kind of like the idea that maybe this would be helpful, and it's certainly something that I offer to my own kids who are now kind of grown up. I say, what would you say to your friend in this moment? Even small children, you can say, what would you say to Joe or Mary or or your dog or your cat? Everybody pretty much can connect with the experience of giving compassion to another, whether that is a pet rat, dog, mouse, grandparent, and then redirecting that to yourself. So that self-compassion break is such a simple, powerful thing. This is difficult. Other people feel like this. Soothing touch. May I be kind to myself? What is it that I most need?
I love, look, that just makes my heart happy. I think that resonates with everybody on tonight's live stream. In fact, I'm just seeing people popping up into the live stream. I love this. Melvina from Hamilton has just said, 45 years a diabetic and still determined to live well. That is just brilliant. I love it, Melvina. Thank you so much for sharing that. And people saying, yes, I'm finding it super challenging, but I'm really trying to work hard. I'm having stressful situations or high emotions. How quickly or suddenly can that affect your blood sugar levels? A very quick call, because I'm aware we're over time as well, so we do need to head away very shortly, but a very good question, the link between that mood and affecting the blood sugars. So not
we know there is a link between chronic stress and blood sugar.
So I guess that the answer is some of the things we've really highlighted with you, Dr. Anna, and with you, Ruby, as well. Breathe, reset, refocus, be mindful, be kind to yourself, love, don't judge. That's essentially what it's all about, right? So Ruby, final words before we head away, because it's been a big conversation. If you could, this is your Oprah Winfrey moment, if you could share a big message with everybody watching, because there's a heap of people on here tonight, if you could share that message, your one message that you want people to understand about, particularly in respect to, with respect to diabetes distress, what would that be?
I think firstly that it's really normal. So if we're experiencing any of this, we're not doing anything wrong, where it's just, you could say it's part of diabetes, where it's a challenging environment to be living in. Being kind to yourself and knowing, as Anna's mentioned, you're not alone in this. We don't get any brownie points for being really stoic with our diabetes. There's people, there's a team around you, your friends and whānau, to help get us through that. And that's for people living with diabetes, and also, I think just as importantly, our incredible parents and caregivers of young children with diabetes who, this is just as relevant. Don't be afraid to reach out.
Yeah, thank you, and that's a really good point. Remember, everybody, you can reach out. There's information flashing up on the screen. Ruby, thank you so much. Really wise words. And finishing with you there, Dr. Anna, you can't argue with science. Science proves that, shares that, there is a correlation between, from your own work, the correlation between the effects of stress on that hormonal response and the increase in blood sugars. So now is your moment, now's your soapbox to share with people what you want them to take away from tonight.
I think both depression and distress can have devastating consequences. So it's important to take it seriously. And as part of that, recognising that kindness matters. It's not just a nice idea. It has measurable effects on our psychology, on our physiology. So be kind to yourself.
I love it. Well, that really does it all, doesn't it? Be kind to yourself and love, don't judge. That's what tonight's topic is all about. This whole month is all about that with Diabetes Action Month. And really, it is time to take action, Aotearoa. We're a team of 5 million. We're a whānau of 5 million. We are here to support ourselves through this journey and support each other with love, no judgment, and that's what these live streams are designed to do. You're as much of the conversation as we are. Sorry if I didn't get to your questions tonight, but keep those questions coming. There are people behind the Facebook pages that you're watching on who are more than happy to answer your questions. And remember too, if you need help, reach out. You've got amazing people like Ruby and Dr. Anna who are here to share their stories, share their experience, share their studies, and share with you how you can work your way through this, something really challenging for 250,000 New Zealanders, but we are all in this together. Ruby, thank you so much for beaming in from Wellington. It's wonderful having you here, and keep up the incredible work that you're doing as a diabetes ambassador and keep sharing the love. I love what you do, so thank you so much.
My pleasure, thank you.
And here in the studio, Dr. Anna Friis, so amazing to hear about your experience and just the wonderful work you're doing with the mindfulness, with the compassion. It's ripples, isn't it? Kindness is a ripple that affects everyone.
Sprinkle those seeds everywhere.
Oh, I totally agree. So thank you so much for your part in tonight's conversation.
Pleasure,
and thank you all for being part of that conversation as well. This is the first of 4 live streams that you'll see throughout November. So please remember, lock it into your diary, 7 p.m. on a Tuesday night. We'll be here and we have amazing guests over the coming episodes. So make sure you join us. It's been an honour to be your facilitator tonight. I'm Monique Bradley, and look after yourselves. Love, don't judge. Thanks, guys, for being part of this. Anna, Ruby, thank you all. See you next time. Ka kite anō, e noho rā.